All right. Here we go, a little bit behind this week, but here nonetheless. And just hitting you up with the weekly 100-year plan, health hacks, and tips. Today is Wednesday the 20th. Good, and we are up and running in the webinar jam room as well. So welcome everyone to the new year, to 2016, to really taking on health and well-being at a whole other level. I'm your host, Jacob McGill, creator, author, iconoclast, and inventor of the 100-year plan. Really, what can I tell you about this? What is the 100-year plan? Simplest solutions possible. What I've been doing for the last 15 years is looking for no-brainers, for how to become well with the least amount of effort. That's for two primary reasons. One of them, I'm lazy. I want life to be easy. Second thing is I work with human beings for a living. I train people. I essentially think of myself as a neurological programmer and a biomechanical engineer. So I work with the brain, the body, and the mind to help my clients become well. And everybody has their own version of wellness. But the simplest side of it is it's got to be easy. It's got to be dead simple. It's got to be almost effortless for us to create a habit change in our life. So it's really about incremental growth or change. It's about process. It's about simplicity and ease of implementation. How simple or easy is it to do is the foundation of the 100-year plan. The other side of it is, what are we going to accomplish now that we know it's easy, right? Now that I sold you on the fact that it's dead simple or it doesn't work, what are we going to do? Well, this revolves around some facts. I got this from a biomolecular chemist first. I went out to other scientists. I did more research. I found it verified in a bunch of different places. So the idea behind the 100-year plan is our DNA is designed to live to 120 easily, without challenges, without disease in terms of degenerative disease, without age-related diseases. And so that's one of the things that we're really going to be taking on throughout this series, which I will run every week until, I don't know, I don't think we're ever going to run out of information, but how do we get it done easily? How do we get it done effortlessly? And how do we live a long time with a high quality of life? Because this whole work for 40 years, 40 hours a week, right? They call it the 40-40 plan. And then retire and start losing your quality of life, start aging, start falling apart, start believing the stuff that your friends and family say, and like, oh, I guess I'm just getting old. It's not true. It's not actually real. And if you understand some of the fundamentals, it's not logical. So when it's not true, when it's not reality, and when it doesn't even make sense, we can just wrap that all up and call it bullshit. And that's basically what I'm here to help you sift through, is what is real and true and what just doesn't make any sense at all. And therefore is something that you can just turn your back on and say, you know, I got this handled. Thanks for your opinion. I get that. And I'm going to be over here taking care of this on my own, because the way you say things work or what you believe makes no sense whatsoever. So that's really the long rant of it, the essence of the 100-year plan. We are designed, our DNA is designed. It's built to live to around 120 years, easily, happily, with mobility, with accessibility, with joy, with vitality, and simply aging is not a choice. You're gonna get older, but falling apart is. So that's what I'm here to kind of break the mold of continuously, and I'll just keep on showing you simple and easily to implement facts, hacks, tips, tricks, tools every single week from here on. So again, welcome to the 100-Year Plan webinar. Now, a little back history, a little who am I? Like, what gives me the authority to say this? This guy's got a bit of an attitude or a belief about it. That's great, but it doesn't, it doesn't mean anything without maybe some evidence. I know there's some of you out there that are like me. Okay, like, okay, great, got it. I believe that you're all excited about this. Now prove it. So my expertise is personal. It started out in a personal journey in my life where I didn't have a choice about taking this stuff on. And then it became something that I eventually developed as a profession. So I'm a health expert because I'm in the 1%. Now let's go through this formula for a second so that you get these pieces. This is published in a bunch of different books. I went out and researched it some more. This one guy built his whole thesis around this number: 98%, 1%, 1%. So 1% of the injuries that he dealt with in his rehabilitation practice were a catastrophic failure. Okay, so the system broke down in a catastrophic way. It was a big incident, possibly violent, traumatic, etc. So I'm a 1%er. What was my 1%? At the end of it, I woke up in a hospital out of a coma. How I got there was I got airlifted. Why I got airlifted is because I was in a single vehicle accident. I was a teenager driving a pickup truck, just young and I guess inexperienced, and fate, act of God, whatever. I hit some gravel, I slid into the ditch, I panicked, and I cranked the wheel to get out of the ditch. And just a word of advice to any of you out there: slow down first. Okay, I reacted without thinking, and because I was still going at a decent speed on the road, well, in the ditch at that time, the cranking the wheels didn't work out so well. You probably know this: the ditch is dirt, and dirt is softer than asphalt. So what happened is the wheels cranked, and this wheel, probably because of the angle of the ditch too, it caught the ground. And the tire and the rim caught the soft dirt, and the truck went end over end 3 times. I've never been a gymnast. I'm not good at tumbling. That was my lifetime achievement in terms of triple somersaults. And that was it. That broke my body up in a bunch of different ways, smashed the truck in on the front, the roof, and the back, crashed the cab in on my head, and busted a bunch of bones, trauma, you name it, ended up in a coma. That's the simple version of it. But I'm in that 1%. And what I was left with when I left the medical system, when I got sent home after being in a hospital bed for months, excuse me, is I was left with this mentality of, like, you're lucky to be alive, which is 100% true, and you're going to be like this for the rest of your life, which now I'm completely clear on makes no sense. There's no actual thing that happens where we're stuck that way for the rest of our lives. And that's a big piece of the 100-year plan. I'm here to tell you about this. So let's get back to that formula for just a sec here. 98%, 1%, 1%. So again, I'm in the 1%. I'm a catastrophic incident survivor. There's also another 1%, which is the pathological incident survivor. Now, the easiest way to sum that up is disease. Classic example is spend a lot of time outdoors. One of the things you want to pay attention to is ticks, because ticks can carry Lyme's disease, and you can contract Lyme. And that is a pathological failure. And I've had a client who contracted that, and I worked with them for an extended period of time in my healthcare practice, and they were a 1% as well. And so when you get those two, 1%, 1% to the side, we are left with a 98%. And in that 98%, and I tell you, these are not my stats. This is high-level research. Lots of people boiled down into this formula. But 98% of the time, physical pain, problems in the body, a breakdown in the system is from something that went wrong on a minor level a long time ago. 5, 10, 15 years. And then one day shows up as a problem. And so this is the biggest piece of the 100-year plan that I'm here to help you get every week over and over, is that you don't know it's a problem often until it's too late. There's an awesome quote about this that I've heard Warren Buffett say, and it was that the chains of habit are too hard to break until after it's too late to notice them. Okay, so something happens. We start behaving in a certain way. We continue to behave in a certain way. And then one day we notice that that behavior is affecting us, right? Those chains of habit. But when you get to that point, you're just like, oh, this really doesn't work. It's limiting me. It's constraining me, like chained, right? They're strong. They become too strong. We've repeated it so many times that it's become the way we do something. And that's a hard thing to deal with. It's a hard thing to shift or to change. So that's really a key component to the fundamental behind the 100-year plan. Let's go back. Let's root out the habits that are at the source of the problem, which on a timeline is often a long distance. And let's deal with it back at the origin so that it leaves us alone for the rest of our lives. So by the time we have these degenerative age-related diseases, for example, that show up in our 60s or our 70s, it's because we've been doing something to cause them for 15 or 30 years. Now, the good news is that how the 100-year plan works, how we get better relatively quickly, is based on some pretty simple and straightforward information, some facts, some, in fact, guarantees in our life. So what are these guarantees? Well, I'll tell you the first one. We make 300 to 500 billion new cells every day. And there's a fancy word for this, or that this is a part of a fancy word called homeostasis. And homeostasis just kind of generically or generally means everything in our body working in organized enough fashion that we're alive. You've heard other words like this that mean a lot of different things going on at once, that are really hard to explain, and people can be experts in little fields of it. And that word is economy, right? The economy. What's that? It's this giant, complicated thing that has a whole bunch of moving parts that all work together. And when they're working together well, things are going okay. And when systems start to break down, uh-oh, right? Crisis. So, thing to get about that is that the problem and the source of the problem are two separate things. And in the body, we have another rule or a fact, and that is pain is very rarely, remember, 98% of the time, pain is not where the injury is, where the problem is. Pain, 98% of the time, is where the compensation pattern is. So let's look at this on the structural or the physical level, because it's just an easy place to get it. Okay, you don't have to think about your liver. But let's look at the knee. Okay, so let's say you're 20 years old and you twist your ankle. Okay, you roll your ankle, you get it back. You know, it's swollen for a few days, it's purple, you wrap it up, you rest, ice, compression, elevation. 2 weeks later, you're playing soccer again. Everything's fine. 5 years later, 10 years later, everything's fine. It feels okay. You don't know that you're compensating a little bit, that you're slightly crooked from that twist of your ankle, and that your knee and your hip aren't aligned as perfectly as they used to be before the injury, because you limped for a couple weeks. You just don't remember that that limping became normal. So there's this tiny, 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 just hair out of place in the ankle. And over a decade, that gets passed up through the system to the knee. And over another 5 years, that gets passed up through the system to the hip, till finally the dysfunction of that hip, knee, ankle system, everything's out just a little bit, shows up. And 15 years later, you're 35 now, there's this minor weakness, and just kind of hanging out one day, playing touch football with the buddies in the backyard, and oh, the knee goes out. There's this weakness, this instability there that's been waiting 15 years for the dam to burst. And you get a knee injury. That isn't really an injury because it just buckled. You didn't get kicked. You didn't get hit by a car in the knee. It just, something happened. It tweaked and it feels funny and it's weird. And you compensate around that a little bit. Get that this is a layer of compensation on top of another layer. Ankle compensation, knee compensation. You're 35. Now, maybe you're a smart 35 and you like train it out a little bit. You go to the physio a couple times, get a massage, and the pain goes away. And you're compensating a little bit more. And you don't notice. And everything's fine. And 5, 10, 15 years go by. But you've been a little bit crooked and a little bit funny. And let's face it, you're working, you're living a life, things are happening. 5 or 10 years later, that knee, it's still funny. It's still weird. You remember that injury. You're still a little bit active. And lo and behold, you're starting to have knee problems. Cartilage is a little bit worn out. And they go in and they scope it. They're going to scrape off a little bit of the cartilage that's pressing on your knee because, well, it hurts, right? And they can see cartilage pressing on nerve. Let's get it out of there. And that's, relatively smart medicine. Makes sense. If you have a thorn, you pull it out. Like, get rid of the splinter. Stop the pain. And offending item. So they do that, but your ankle, hip, and knee aren't any better in alignment. You just have the thing that was causing the pain removed. And now you're 45, right? And You're just kind of accepting, well, this is all part of getting old. This is just what happens. I'm not as active as I used to be. It must be that. And you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, and 10 years later, you have continuous hip pain. And that's a lot of the people that I see. They come in through the door and they're not only experiencing hip pain, but by the time they come around to seeing me, they're scheduled for a hip replacement. I've had this happen enough times. One client, I love using this story because it's so clear. This guy's a businessman. He thought in numbers and odds. If he was a poker player or a gambler, I think he'd say the same thing. He said to me, you know, I've got this hip replacement scheduled in January, and we're sitting down in September. He said, 70% of my hip pain goes away when I wear my orthotics. Now again, this guy's a 98%er. He didn't have a car accident. He didn't fall bungee jumping or skydiving. He didn't get kicked by a horse in his hip, right? Hip pain just showed up one day after it getting passed throughout the system, and this ankle and knee problem and everything else going far enough out that it's finally dysfunctional in the hip and it hurts. But he knew 70%, 70 to 30 odds, right? If you have a 70% odds, you bet on yourself. If you have 30% odds, you bet on the house winning. Like, we know this is true. So we started a process and we worked through it, and we canceled that hip replacement because the pain was gone and the alignment issue was no longer there. And he had had a knee surgery like 5 years before, and this whole system's going out of balance thing, you see it all the time everywhere once you know to look for it, once you know to think about it. So again, here, weekly, the 100-year plan, I am delivering you tips, tactics, strategies, health hacks to help you balance out the systems, to help keep that homeostasis up and running, to help you generate health and well-being in such a way that you don't get taken out by these little things way down at the end of the line. Because health is really like this series of dominoes, and if you set them all up, you can push them in either direction, right? You got a string of 75 dominoes there as your health and well-being. And you can end up at these tipping points in your life, and you're just like, oh, I'm gonna tip it, and the system's gonna go this way, improving things, right? Or you can remain unaware of it, not take any actions. You can tip it the other way, and the health goes out of balance. And you get these incidents that show up where you think you're in the 1%. You think, oh my God, this is a catastrophe. But I promise you, most often, you're in the 98%, and this is something that's been set up for a long period of time. And the good news is you can go back in there and push things back in the other direction, because we make 300 to 500 billion new cells every day. You're constantly growing a new you. The day you stop is the day that you literally start dying. We're rushing you to the hospital if homeostasis isn't working. But until then, we have the opportunity to tip things back in the other direction. We have the chance to realign, to grow new materials out of the new things into a new environment. And that's what life is. Now, there's different numbers or statistics on this. So I'll give you the two bookends. One of them is we replace most of our cells every 4 months. So if you think about this in terms of the system, you really have 3 chances a year to grow a new you. Now, we don't replace everything all at once, but if you think about that in cycles, a year is a really big opportunity when you change some fundamental habits. And I'm welcoming you to consider this for 2016, that this could be the year of total renewal and rejuvenation for you. You can start that cycle anytime. You don't replace cells on a calendar. Any day you choose to start, that's the beginning of that replacement cycle. Now, secondarily, and this is again verifiable proof, there is nothing in us that's more than 7 years old. We replace everything within that 7-year window, absolutely every piece. I myself, because of the car accident and the multiple surgeries that were related to it, I've got one thing for you that's more than 7 years old in this body. It's called a humeral nail, and it's a titanium pin that's 16 inches long that's inside this arm bone. And that's it. Everything else in me is alive. It's living tissue, and it's being replaced at this rate. And that is my like one trophy of permanence of the piece of my body that's older than 7 years. But unless you have something like that, you are essentially younger than me. Just think about that for a minute. Keep that in the back of your mind. And that's the first lesson really for this week, to take you into the next week towards the next layer of this stuff. The first tip for the 100-year plan to start implementing, to start taking a look at your health and well-being, is you start digesting the thoughts that you are not in a state of permanence, that the case of your health is a constantly shifting, changing set of circumstances known as homeostasis. It's unavoidable. It comes with being alive. You're not permanent. You're growing and changing all the time. You're growing new cells. Old ones are dying off, right? That's why you need haircuts. So just keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll start applying different tools and different practices to this fundamental principle, that it's time to start thinking a little bit differently about the fact that you are alive. So thank you very much for your time. And again, this is a weekly webinar. We're going to be running this one. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to engaging with you. We're going to be answering questions. We're going to be fielding out through the themes. I'm going to be launching my books. And yeah, this is going to be a really big year. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm super excited. Really looking forward to sharing it with you. Thank you so much for your time. And stay healthy. Okay. Take care.